Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm Mark Denton. I'm the Director of Development Product at OLM, and Tanya and her team work for me. And I guess I was the executive sponsor within OLM. If you've been reading the chat, you may have realised why I have a particular interest in this, because outside of OLM, my wife and I foster for one of the local authorities here in the UK. But anyway, enough about me. Let's get on with the session. So the next session is about designing for voice. And I'm going to hand over to Joanne Evans of Monash University in Australia. Joanne.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just take a moment to share my screen. And get it in slideshow view, so I hope you're seeing the right view there. And a big thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's symposium. I'm coming to you from my home office, which is on the unceded of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, acknowledging their stewardship of culture and their care for country over many, many millennia. I'd also like to extend those respects to other First Nations peoples from Australia and other parts of the world that may be with us today. We know that Australia is not the only jurisdiction grappling with the overrepresentation of First Nations people in child welfare and protection systems and the intergenerational aspects or impacts of assimilation policies, forced child removals, racial discrimination and socioeconomic disadvantage. We also know too well, thanks to the voices and the tireless activism of those with lived and living experiences, of how records and record keeping systems can perpetuate these problems for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals, families and communities, and hence the need to strive for systems that can deliver better outcomes for all. So a big congratulations to the MIRRA Plus project team on the work that they've done to progress participatory care record keeping and help us move towards the people-centric systems we would all like to see as de facto and de rigueur in this space. So here in my, I think, 20 minutes, hopefully I'll stick to it, to give a brief update on the rights in records by design research that we've been doing here in Australia, which we spoke about at the 2019 MIRRA Symposium, which seems a lifetime away. So a brief whip through that context. So in May 2017, we held the Setting the Record Straight for the Rights of the Child Summit, bringing together those concerned with the systemic and enduring nature of the problems with past and present records and record keeping in the care sector. And it was designed around centering the voices of those with living experience. On day one, we listened and learned about the issues with care record keeping and archiving systems. And on day two, then imagined a better future, developing a shared vision of distributed participatory record keeping and archiving systems, and then discussing what needed to turn that vision into a reality. So from that came a plan to work towards developing a national framework for record keeping for childhood out-of-home care, to transform record keeping and archiving systems in Australia. There was a recognition that we could only go so far with incremental improvements to existing systems, and that there was a need for more substantive redesign, reimagining and redesign indeed, for multiple rights in record keeping to be represented and enacted. So this plan aims to facilitate unified collaboration and strategic action to transcend the boundaries of individual organisations, sectors and jurisdictions, apply to the records of yesterday, today and tomorrow, and be supported by targeted research and develop an action and advocacy agendas to lead the design and development of critical systems infrastructure. And we identified these elements of a proposed national framework being the record keeping principles for child-safe organisations that have come out of our Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, a unifying rights-based charter for childhood record keeping and out-of-home care, the need for independent advocacy and oversight of record-keeping rights, and socio-technical transformation to go beyond automating existing record-keeping and archiving processes towards reimagining the way that people, processes, and technological systems come together to provide lifelong living archives for those with care experiences. And so the goal is to design and develop child, person-centered, participatory, interoperable, networked infrastructure that can support lifelong identity, memory, and accountability needs. So in that big event, my focus has principally been on progressing the research and development agenda, having fortunately secured funding from the Australian Research Council for the Rights and Records by Design project. And this brought together a transdisciplinary research team from Monash University, Federation University, and also community advocates to further develop, model and prototype the elements of the framework. So both the summit and the Rights and Records by Design project reflect a human-centered participatory design ethos, drawing on the principles of creativity, participation, open-headed and also open-hearted design thinking to iteratively understand this complex problem, imagine new ways of addressing it, and then develop potential solutions. So the setting in this slide to sort of show you that the Setting the Records Straight Summit and the strategy does that at kind of the sector scale, where community participation was in the development of that shared strategic vision. And then we've then looked to implement a thread of that strategy through applying participatory research and participatory design methodologies to the development of participatory record-keeping infrastructure. So lots of participatories. So what have we been able to achieve? Well, the first key outcome to highlight has been the development of a Charter of Lifelong Rights in Childhood Record Keeping for Out-of-Home Care, led by my esteemed colleague, Professor Sue McCamish. It has involved the warranting of the initial ideas of record-keeping rights that were put forward at the summit, using the testimonial evidence that the numerous inquiries and reviews conducted into the Australian child welfare and protection sector has put on the public record, and the record-keeping rights implicit and explicit in existing rights statement and governance instruments produced by UN bodies and Australian child protection policymakers. So the Charter encompasses framing rights of accountability, memory, identity and participation, with principles of self-determination, archival autonomy for well-being, cultural safety and justice, together forming the whys of record-keeping. And that then leads to a set of record-keeping rights grouped around participatory record-keeping, agency and access and disclosure, and rights to privacy and safe record-keeping. So the Charter is a tool that can guide immediate reform and larger scale transformations in the sector. Its articulation of record-keeping rights is to help shift from continual redescription of record-keeping problems and failings towards discussions about fulfilling record-keeping responsibilities to meet child and human right obligations. So the second outcome has been the co-designing of a lifelong living archives prototype, a technical demonstrator of how record-keeping rights in care systems might be dynamically enacted. And we set up a small co-design and co-research team with a group of younger care leaver advocates that were interested in records and record-keeping issues. And as advocates, they have past or present involvement as young consultants with the CREATE Foundation, which is the peak advisory body here in Australia for children and young people in out-of-home care, where they've undergone extensive training to develop advocacy, leadership and public speaking skills, turning their living experience into expertise and push for positive change in the care sector. So through a series of co-design and co-research workshops, we've worked together on an understanding records and record-keeping wants, wishes, desire, needs and aspirations, and how they might be implemented in a digital system. The design process has been a mutual learning experience. We've learned from our co-design team of the kinds of activities in which care records are produced, what they mean in the moment and of their significance later in life, and how they would like to participate in their creation, management and use. And they've learnt from us about record keeping frameworks, processes and systems, along with web app and systems design considerations, and also about research processes and systems as well too. So what have we prototyped? Well, here's a representation of the plethora of department, placement, agency, school, medical, carer and family systems with which a care experienced person interacts either directly or indirectly, leading to records being distributed over this fractured and fragmented network. Currently, they are the client of many, many systems. And while we welcome some of the promising client or child-centered developments happening in organisational systems, we were interested in putting a primacy on the agency and autonomy of the care experienced person in enacting their record-keeping rights. So we asked, what happens if the care experienced person has their own record-keeping system to interact with all the other systems in this network? So we've developed MISSI as a prototype of a record-keeping system for a care experienced person to kind of break the shackles of being forever the client, the subject or the case of organisational systems and enable them to participate in their records network on equitable terms. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to quickly highlight some key functionality and how it has been designed to enact record-keeping rights. Firstly, when it comes to rights to identity and privacy, we develop functionality for capturing and managing personal information, and most importantly, having a say over how it gets distributed. So here is where personal details can be captured in a single safe place, and then profiles can be set up to share sets of that with different categories of people. And this was a response to talking about at times not actually knowing about family, friend, culture and community connections. And it's quite shocking to hear over and over again that that's still happening now. It's not something in the past. Also the frustration at having to tell one story and provide personal details over and over again. But also conversely, addressing the sensation of my file preceding me, where there's a lack of knowledge and control over who gets to see what personal information. And that's particularly acute when developing relationships with new carers, workers and other care sector professionals. Also, you might note, it's probably a bit small, there's an interacting with me tab that we've got there. And this was in response to talking about having behaviour misinterpreted or being put in triggering situations. And so that was identified as being of particular concern. The next is what we call control sharing functionality, which is to manage how personal information and other records from MISSI could be made available to others. And again, this was a response to the desire to participate in record keeping once becoming aware of the way in which records represent you in the care system, and with particular needs around transitioning to adulthood and independent living in mind, when you need and indeed want to be put in control of your own documentation. So we discussed a lot about the systems and record keeping literacy that's needed when you grow up in care, and how they should be encouraged to develop the knowledge and skills for keeping sensitive and personal information safe and secure. Also of how important having the opportunity to participate in information and record sharing it is, rather than just being the passive client of organisational systems. So with controlled sharing, records are stored and served by a registry server so that you can specify controls and track access. The share can be set up by specifying an audience tag and an expiration date. And this is where, instead of, as what was talked about with Hannah, having it expire on you share it with people and you can have it expire on them. an access code, and also a customizable consent notice where you can also spell out your terms on which you're sharing the record of the personal information. We talked a lot about the granularity and the burden that all this could create, but in some ways it's about representing its latent functionality. It's there to be activated if and when it's needed. If you trust those in your care circle and feel safe and secure, then it just doesn't have to be utilised. The third bit of functionality to highlight is for finding and accessing records. And this is premised on rights to transparency and accountability, with the onus on the care system to proactively disclose where the records, where your records are held, and having a single point of access to the whole network. So this is the Find Records interface. The idea is that when someone activates their MISI, then immediately they'd be able to see which organisations hold records about them, and then can choose how and when to go about accessing them. And this functionality reflects that finding out about and accessing records is an emotional experience, and it's vital to have a sense of control over the process. We had lots of robust discussions in our workshops about different approaches and preferences, how some might want to have a complete list of records immediately from the start, while others might want more granular and dynamic control of the process. We've prototyped sort of some functionality where you can hide sites and records that might have unpleasant and distressing associations and memories, and then reactivate them when and if you need to. So once you look at a site, you can then view a list of records for registering into your MISI, and to see, as you can see here, just some simple functionality to show that you can filter by date and then select the ones that you want to register either individually or in bulk. And then once registered, you can then add your own metadata and notes, relabeling them, fixing up any date issues, writing, your version of what's in them. So enacting that right of reply, and then being able to specify who you could then share that back with in the network.
Joanne, you've got about 2 minutes left.
Yep, I should be good. Thank you. So that's a bit about the front end interfaces, what's going on under the hood. Well, this is the simple schemata of MISI's networked architecture, of which we haven't implemented. We've only implemented a slice of it. So it's a web app front end to a record-keeping metadata registry, acting as the gateway and coordinator of a child, young person, care leavers records network. And it was a bit of an aha moment when we realised that a records registry is what was needed, which I'm sure those of you coming from a record-keeping background might appreciate. And yes, it has massive technical and other implications for record-keeping systems in the care sector. It's a research prototype rather than an immediately implementable system. It's a design provocation, tools of and for the reimagining of distributed rights-based participatory record-keeping networks. And we have to have these conversations if we are to enable those with care experiences to equitably participate in the record-keeping that documents their childhoods and resonates so much throughout their lives. So I'll conclude with final reflections on participation, and I've actually rewritten this bit today in the light of what's been going on here in Australia over the past few days with the National Summit on Women's Safety, so I hope it translates, and apologies that the slide is a bit of a jumble of thoughts. There's been a lot of discussion led by Australian of the Year Grace Tame, who's a childhood sexual abuse survivor, along with many others, of how it's missed the mark when it comes to listening to and actively involving those with lived and living experiences in this policy development exercise. And so while that's been disappointing, it's been pleasing to hear the more sophisticated discussion in the media about why lived experience, voice and agency is so important, and why it needs to be so much more than just asking them to tell and often retell their story. Grace has pointed to the fundamental need to address the power imbalances in both processes and outcomes if real transformation is to happen. And a quote there from the the drum last night on the TV, where the presenter, Julia Baird, said every conversation changes if people are not spoken about, but are spoken with. And through our Rights and Records by Design research and with the Setting the Record Straight agenda, we're looking to have participation be about changing the power dynamics around record keeping. And a final thought, something I've done over the past few days. My apologies that I can't remember exactly who, when, and where, but Google tells me that perhaps the earliest attribution is Tolstoy. And I guess just to make it my own, that systems transformation is impossible until it is inevitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne. As a technology vendor, that is fascinating on so many different levels for me. A very insightful and very good presentation. So we're going to move on. Stuart Hill from Social Care Network is going to talk about the Charms website for young people. So over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the welcome. Yeah, so I suppose the TLDR here, if you're wondering what I'm going to be talking about, is that we already have a system that you've been talking about today in action with agencies and children using them. So I'm going to go through that process in hopefully 10 short minutes and keep it interesting for you. First off, Charms is the software solution of Social Care Network. And it's pretty much used by the fostering community. Probably 80–85% of the community uses it. A bit of history about us, so you understand where we're coming from and why we do what we do. Is we're a social enterprise. Our board is very much sits on the left wing politically. We have no interest in selling our business to anyone to make a profit, and our entire ethos is to deliver software to our community at a price they can afford. And our underlying philosophy is that if anybody needs our software, they've got it. It doesn't matter whether they can afford it or not. And we've been pushing that since 1995-ish. And I'm sure a number of you that are here today will have come across Charms. I'm not saying it's the best thing ever. It's not. Is it complete? No. Does it do everything wonderfully? No, but it does do what it does well. And obviously by its uptake, it's working well. I checked yesterday to see on our carer portal, in the past month, 10,200 carers had logged in every single day to update their children's daily logs, so looked after children's daily logs. So it gives you some idea of our experience in managing software and making it work for people. So it was about 5 years ago, of course, that we started to hear more about implementing the child's voice in this whole process of looked after children. And we started to work on that at that point. What we did, typically, I mean, we sort of just fire off and put software together and see if anybody takes it, uses it, and then we start to graft it. But this time we did it slightly differently. We had a relationship with the University of Kiel up in Stoke-on-Trent, and we had a program with them whereby we used a postgrad student. We agreed with about 10 of our agencies that she could go out and she could interview children, looked after children, and ask them what they would want if they had a portal which was designed for them. After that research, what they came back with was a series of results. And what we also did was we have a developer. She was a looked after child, and we asked her to implement the entire portal for those children based on the replies. What did the kids say? What did they want when we spoke to them? Well, what they said to us was they wanted this to be their own space. So the key point that we got back from them was that they didn't want us in any way to have anybody to be able to dive in and change stuff. It was theirs. If it was theirs, it was theirs. Simple as that. That was the bottom line. They wanted to store and record information about their life, links, videos, photos, documents, invitations to parties, all of the sorts of things that you've been talking about today. They wanted to be able to remind themselves how they felt on any particular day or any moment they were in the application. So they could remind themselves going later on, how they were at that particular time. They wanted a private diary area. So they want an area which not only would be shareable, but also private. And they wanted to have immediate contact with their social workers and with the other people at the agencies that were working with them. Charms has a communication system. You can video or you can chat with anyone that's currently logged in on Charms. So they wanted that as part of their portal as well. And so that's what we put into place. I'm not going to show in 10 minutes. I haven't got time to go through showing you screenshots and things, but basically it looks like Facebook. It's like, but it's a solo book. So it comes up, it's posted. Each post is, you know, information that the child has added to the system. So interesting feedback that we've got was first that now we've got the child's voice. There's, I always thought it was really odd that, you know, and I've heard this today from some of the contributors, that children would leave care and the only voice they've got in their entire life is the voice of adults who've been looking after them or have a commercial interest in them or, you know, have no real knowledge of the child themselves. So that's a really terrible thing that we thought. And so now we've encapsulated in our system the voice, but there was pushback from agencies, and the pushback on the agency was about whose data is it, something that I think everybody's covered today. And is this the child's data, or is this the agency's data, or is it someone else's data? And the way we've designed it, that this is the child's data. Within Charms, the social worker, the agencies, the local authorities, they can share data with the child. If that data is shared, if a decision is made to share the data with the child from Charms to get some feedback or to show them a document or something like that, then that data becomes the child's. The child has all of the access rights over it. As a social enterprise, our philosophy is that this data will be accessible forever for the children. We have no interest in selling our business to anyone, and therefore our commitment to the child is that, you know, this portal is yours. Once you're in there, that data is yours, and away you go. Whenever you need it, it'll be yours. It is a memory repository, but obviously a digital one, not a physical one. So the physical one, I think, is still really important, isn't it, for kids? And yeah, it's theirs to take. The adoption of it, just to finish off with, it's been pretty positive. I mean, we've got hundreds and hundreds of children using the system now. It's very positive from the child's side. It's good adoption by the agencies who really like it as well. The only really big issue has been the pushback on the private diary area. So the agencies are struggling to get their heads around this and are trying to get us to switch this area off. Questions would come up like, well, what if a child was feeling suicidal and they made that reference into their private diary area and not into an area which could be shareable and viewable by both sides? Well, you know, that's what care is all about. You should know that, surely. You should know if the child that's being looked after is suicidal or not. And whose child does not, who's not had a child or has known someone who's a great diarist, you know. I mean, I remember having a diary with a lock on it. You'd write the diary, that's your private area. Whether it's digital or whether it's physical is neither here nor there. So in terms of feedback, we've had almost every agency has pushed back on this. Can the other questions we've had from agencies are, can the children contact us at any time then? Does that mean that at 10 o'clock at night, they might be able to crank up the app and say they want to speak to someone? And the answer is, well, yes, you're supposed to be caring for this child. So if you don't have anyone overnight, then you're going to have an issue. And the developer who wrote it, Eleanor, said, actually, this would have been really useful when I was looked after, to be able to just hook up to a social worker whenever I was down or I had a question or needed some help would have been really, really good for me. And it was something that we never really had when she was there. Stuff it could do, but doesn't do. I mean, info pushed to the children, it doesn't do that yet. You know, there's nothing fed through to them, so they see stuff definitely. There's nothing like offers or help or organizational stuff. It really is a solo book for them to digitally record their life as they go through care. So yeah, that's me. I think that's my time up. I can see it's 11:10. I won't keep you any longer, but I think I will be in the breakout session if anybody needs to ask us more about the experience. So the experience generally is good. It's in development and the children are loving it. So yeah, great to work towards. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Stuart. I love the bit about the private area. Is it really private? Can I see into it? And everybody forgets that I could write something on a piece of paper and stick it in my pocket.
Absolutely.
But because it's digital, we think it's all different. So thank you for your presentation. Right, I think I'm handing back to Pete now, who's going to tell us all about breakout rooms and how we get into the next.